The name Colonel Samuel Smith is undoubtedly familiar to residents of the Etobicoke Lakeshore community. The south end of Kipling bears his name, as does the waterfront park along the edge of Lake Ontario and the winter skating trail. But who was the person behind the name? Who was Colonel Samuel Smith?
Colonel Samuel Smith was one of the first settler landowners in this area of South Etobicoke, what is now City of Toronto. The land was originally part of the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Around the end of the 17th century, the Mississaugas of the Credit had an estimated 3.9 million acres of land under their stewardship, covering much of what is now southern Ontario. In the Michi-Sagig language, the region was known as Etobicoke, which roughly translates to place of the alders. The arrival of Loyalists in the post-Revolutionary War years put pressure on the British to find land to secure military control of waterways between Lake Ontario and Lake Huron. In 1787, the British Crown met with the Mississaugas of the Credit to acquire their lands around Lake Ontario, the first in a series of land surrenders known as the Toronto Purchase. The initial tract of land included much of what is today's City of Toronto and the municipality of York, but the agreement was fraught with discord. The British claimed to have purchased the land, while the Mississaugas agreed only to a rental of their lands. The land remained under dispute, with amendments made in 1805, continuing until 1998, when the Mississaugas of the Credit filed a formal complaint against the Government of Canada. A settlement for this agreement was not reached until 2010. Back to the 18th century. With the land presumed to be ceded from the Mississaugas, the British began to divide segments for returning Loyalists. In 1793, almost 2,600 acres were granted to Colonel Samuel Smith for his service in the Queen's Rangers. The property extended from the shoreline of Lake Ontario in the south all the way north to what is today Bloor Street, and from Kipling Avenue west to Etobicoke Creek. Smith also acquired 300 acres further east, where the original Trinity College campus would be built.
Let's rewind a bit. Smith was the son of Scottish immigrants, born in Hampstead on New York's Long Island, sometime around either 1756 or 1760. The exact date is unknown. He later joined the Queen's Rangers in 1777, either at the age of 16 or 21, depending on which birth year you apply.
The Queen's Rangers were a Loyalist military unit of the American Revolutionary War who later served in Upper Canada. They were named for Queen Charlotte, the Queen Consort of King George III. Now, this military unit was first assembled in 1776 on Staten Island and would grow to include 937 officers and men. When Smith enlisted a year later, John Graves Simcoe was in command. After a number of successful campaigns, the regiment was among those that surrendered in the Battle of Yorktown in 1781 to General George Washington. The regiment was officially disbanded following the war, and many of the men headed north to settle in what is today New Brunswick. But the regiment would soon be reformed for a short time in Upper Canada from 1792 until 1802. Now, during this time, they constructed government buildings and made fortifications to York, which is today Toronto, and cut roads through the forest, including Yonge Street north to the Holland River and Dundas Street, or what was then Governor's Road, to West London.
Smith, for his part, rose through the ranks of the Queen's Rangers during the war, moving from ensign to captain. He later moved with his fellow Loyalists to New Brunswick after Yorktown and traveled back and forth between England and New Brunswick for a time. And when the Queen's Rangers were reformed, Smith was sent with a detachment first to Niagara and later to York. He continued to move his way through the ranks. In 1799, he was given command of the regiment, and in 1801 was promoted to lieutenant colonel.
In 1799, Samuel Smith, who's either 39 or 43, depending again on that disputed birth year, married 20-year-old Jane Isabella Clark. It's unclear exactly how the two might have met, but it's likely due to their respective Loyalist connections. Jane was born in Stratford, Connecticut, to a large family. She had 8 sisters and 1 brother. Her father, Dr. Joseph Clark, had declared himself loyal to the British during the Revolutionary War and fought as a Loyalist. When the war ended in 1783, the family's home was seized by Patriots and the family was forced to flee north, making their way to New Brunswick with their fellow Loyalists, all while Jane was only 4 years old. Once in New Brunswick, her father resumed his medical practice. Smith had land at the time not far from where the Clark family settled, although they might have known each other through this way, the rest is unclear.
We know little about Jane during her marriage to Smith, but what we do know is that she traveled by canoe with her sister and 5 nieces in 1798, all the way from New Brunswick to Ontario, so that the 2 sisters could rejoin their respective partners, both of whom were serving with the rebanded Queen's Rangers. Jane and Samuel would marry officially in 1799 in what is today Niagara-on-the-Lake. Together they would have a total of 11 children, 9 sons and 2 daughters.
The Smith family would settle in South Etobicoke, building a log cabin in 1797 just behind me here at what is today Michelin Saint-Cyr Elementary School on 41st Street. The cabin was built of pine and originally featured 4 rooms. 2 additional rooms were added on later to either side of the building, as well as siding to the front exterior to hide the original log cabin style. When the family first moved in, the land was very heavily wooded, but they began to clear sections of that land for use as a farm. The family also built a sawmill on Etobicoke Creek and bred horses.
But Smith was not known to have any particular skill as a farmer. For a short time, he entered into the political sphere. In 1815, Smith was appointed to Upper Canada's Executive Council, and he later served as a temporary administrator of Upper Canada. There are mixed reviews in the literature, but most historians seem to agree that Smith had limited, if not poor, skills as a politician as well.
In spite of the vast acreage he owned and his political affiliations, Smith was not a wealthy man. Both he and Jane died within a month of one another in 1826, leaving 9 of their children without support. Their surviving children would eventually be forced to petition the government for a grant to help support the family's homestead. This grant money does not seem to have gone into developing the land, which remained relatively unchanged over the next 3 decades. In 1861, the Smith children sold the house to James and Margaret Eastwood, along with approximately 500 acres of the property along the lakefront.
The Eastwoods continued to clear more trees from the property and also farmed portions of it. In 1883, they sold about 50 acres on the east side of their segment to a consortium who planned to develop it for summer vacationers. But the plan sat frozen for another 3 years until Thomas Wilkie revived the vision under the name of Long Branch Park.
As Long Branch Park became more and more popular, the Eastwoods continued to sell segments of their land for further cottage developments. By 1920, they had sold the remainder of their property, leaving only 6 acres surrounding the immediate vicinity of their house.
Although Long Branch Park itself was known for its old-growth trees and canopied streets, the land closest to Etobicoke Creek became known as the Flats. These sections had been cleared for farming, first by the Smith family and then by the Eastwoods. Throughout the 1930s and the 1940s, the area faced a series of severe floods, with the Flats struggling with some of the worst damage. The most dramatic changes to the landscape came in 1954, when Hurricane Hazel brought over 200 millimeters of rain in 2 days and winds that topped 124 kilometers per hour. Without trees to hold back her banks, Etobicoke Creek broke the eastern bank, completely flooding what were then called Island Road, 43rd Street, and 42nd Street. 43 homes were destroyed in the Long Branch area from the hurricane, with another 160 homes being expropriated afterwards in the cleanup. Both 43rd Street and Island Road were eliminated to make room for the creation of Marie Curtis Park, a public park designed to mitigate future damages to the area while providing valuable green space to the growing city.
And what of the Smith Homestead? Officially, the house survived the hurricane, but it would be demolished a year later in 1955. It had been in continuous use for 152 years, first by the Smith family and later by the Eastwoods. The last resident, the Eastwoods' great-great-grandson, moved out sometime around 1949. By the time the decision was made to demolish the home, it was in pretty poor shape, both from repeated flooding as well as from disuse.
Our story today has been made possible by a number of people who asked questions about the history of the neighborhood long before us. In particular, we would like to thank the Mississaugas of the Credit, local historians Denise Harris and Jaan, and Loyalist historian Davidson for their valuable research. A list of the sources we consulted can be found in the video description. Thanks for watching.